welcome to After the Podcast for Seraphine. I'm Seraphine Arocha, and with me, who you'll be seeing after every podcast, is the Aaron Graham.
What's up?
It's
How we
our
doing?
first time. I love it. I'm going to let Aaron real quick tell you how we became the team behind Seraphine.
Yeah, so basically, me and Seraphine have been working for about a year now. We both did a podcast for this company called YPG. I'm also an owner of that company now. And so she came to me, and we had a really good working relationship. We just had a good connection with just everything work. We could relate with everything that, like, value-wise and everything like that. So, you know, she came to me with a proposal of starting her own podcast. We had this podcast rig, and it was like it just worked out in our favor.
Yeah, it's kind of cool because you're going to see where the studio is built out little by little. Right now, this is just kind of a makeshift studio, but it's going to look pretty professional.
I'm excited for it.
It's going to be really cool.
Yeah, I think we can definitely turn this into something, you know, especially because you are planning on moving here within the next year, hopefully 2 years.
Yep.
So we didn't go all the way out. We just got some, foam boards just to dampen the sound, because this room already is pretty soundproof.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're looking at getting a nice big LED sign back there, which I'm excited for.
Totally.
Furniture comes in about 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Yeah, 3-4 weeks. And
all custom.
Yep, all custom made, and it was just cool to have a vision and be like, all right, we're gonna like do this, and
right.
How quickly we put it together, because it was over COVID, right? Where we're sitting around, we're like, what are we going to do? Like our life course changed huge over 2 months, and I think that I was pushed to do this by my husband, Johnny, at some point. I'll have to get him on the podcast. And I had enjoyed doing podcasting. I knew that I needed help with all the technical, just editing sound. But I was willing to put the time, the energy, and then just building out this room, and making it something that was just a little bit above and beyond what we were doing with Yoga Pants Gallery, and really committing to having a podcast. Funny thing is, like, now I've got my dogs here. Little by little, you'll start to see the professional part,
the involvement
of the podcast come to fruition, and it's
you got to start somewhere.
You do.
And starting out at YPG, we definitely grew from the point of we didn't have any of these mics. We were working with, handheld recorders and lav mics. Couldn't really hear yourself. So when we got this, shooting with this board and these mics with YPG, it just changed the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
And then when you get in the seat, a lot of people are intimidated, but like, it just makes it feel so professional.
Yeah, the weight of your words.
Right.
You literally hear your words back in your ears along with the other person. And then it's this sense of like, you have a microphone, and a microphone is a platform no matter what, because it's projecting your voice out. And then we're recording. I didn't want it just to be sound. I wanted it to be visual, because I feel like what gets lost a lot of times is the emotion in people's eyes, or like the nervous tics. Like,
right.
You'll sit, like, he got to observe with me and a friend of mine, Dr. Auburn Ellis. Like, she and I have had a really quick friendship, and I thought it would be so easy to have her as my first guest. And then I got her resume, and then I got her, like, papers she wrote, and I was like, oh my God, I am so intimidated. And I have never had nerves like that. And I think you witnessed those
definitely
nerves.
So from the outsider perspective of just like, seeing it through the lens and recording it, you definitely, from my personal experience and like being friends with you and being friends with Dr. Auburn, I've never seen you kind of just hesitant on what to say. It's just because I feel like you found something in Dr. Auburn that you didn't know, and it's just, you put her kind of like, you realize how she has a doctorate, how high of a pedestal she really is.
Yeah.
Even though
Yeah,
she's
yeah,
your
yeah.
friend,
Yeah.
it's just very intimidating because she's such a high educated person that has all this knowledge, and you're like, wow, I just learned all this about her, and then I'm going to interview her about it. So, I mean, I could definitely see you hesitate a little bit.
Oh, totally. I think the other thing that was really hard is, we did this podcast, and the inaugural first one, and at first this podcast, when I approached Aaron, was going to be completely things that I liked, like film directors, artists, musicians. I volunteer over at a dog shelter. I didn't think that the trajectory and kind of the direction where we were going to go was going to go down this kind of socially minded people who they're going beyond what they are just doing in life. Mm-hmm. They are now trying to reach their higher, better self. And the way that happened was through all of the movement for Black Lives Matter. And I just felt like my cage was rattled, and that I could no longer just do a podcast that was just another podcast about, well, you're really cool. Uh-huh. Like it's really awesome that you're a yoga instructor, or, you just cut this album. I wanted to know, like, what is behind the person. And with
people
her,
making changes
totally
in this world.
Yeah, being movers and shakers and change makers, and like people who are coming up with new ideas. So with her, I think where the intimidation came in was, not only is she highly educated, but she is educating people.
Yeah, with her new her platform.
Her new platform, her virtual, basically a virtual training on anti-racism. And it was nerve-wracking because I'm still trying to get comfortable with the things that I have been learning. There is a whole new dialogue. There are new words and definitions that just weren't used 5 years ago.
Right.
And then a few books came out a few years ago. The book I was reading before the interview with her was Me and White Supremacy, by Layla Assad. And I just, it was a lot for a first podcast.
Eye-opening?
Yeah. So
mind-opening.
Yeah.
That's really what it is.
So as you observed it, I don't know, what were your thoughts just about what she said and just the interaction? What was your...
I think for an opening podcast, and when this gets released, it's going to be huge. The knowledge that she has and the movement and her platform that she's creating, at least in Kansas City, I don't see anybody doing things like that.
Yeah.
Nationwide, it's people with like higher resumes, you would say, like someone who's more like famous, just has more of an audience.
Yeah, they've got a bigger footprint
right.
on.
Right.
Yeah.
So this coming from someone, not a lot of people know Dr. Auburn, of course, yet.
Yeah.
But
yet. It's a key word.
Once we release this, once her platform gets more traction, like they'll realize the knowledge that she has and that she's giving to other people as a platform, I think is going to be just, I want to look at it to see what it's really teaching, because from the podcast, knowing her personally as a friend, I value her knowledge.
100%. She just allows you to stumble through it because it's heavy content. I mean, to do the work and to really peel back the layers of systemic racism within yourself. And even in a lot of the text that I was reading, there's a lot of different viewpoints. So obviously I'm basically a white girl. I've got Middle Eastern in my background, and then my mom is pretty much all white. She's got like New Zealand, Irish. I always want to say Australian because it feels so badass. But yeah, so I'm basically a white girl, right? But I really clung to the Persian part. And then there's a whole another set of rules for biracial. And then there's a whole nother set of rules by being African American. And I mean, and BIPOC in general, it's like indigenous people. I mean, to understand it, to break it down, to start to navigate your thoughts, and also kind of get out of your own way. It's not fun. I mean, I'll be honest with you. It's especially not fun when you're sitting across somebody who has dissected it.
Right.
In 2013, she wrote an incredible dissertation about trying to merge art and education practices through the lens of like critical race theory, so critical race theory is basically like educating people on we have history, art, all these different contexts of what we learn to get our high school degree or college. And so much of it is leaving out anything to do with Black culture. And she's basically training people on how do you implement and bring into the forefront, hi, these are black activists.
Artists, yeah.
These are Black artists. These are Black politicians. So we aren't just talking about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman. There are so many more people who have made big moves.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
And didn't she say something? I don't know if this was in the podcast or if this was outside the podcast, where we were talking about people thought like Harriet Tubman was like the move. Like, was that in the podcast?
Yeah. I think that was in the podcast.
Where
or at least it was offline to where, yeah. I mean,
people think like Harriet Tubman was like the reason for like a racial movement, but that was way before. Like in the Rosa Parks, there's only a certain amount of names that get publicized to where, you know, some people go in the shadows when they're making the biggest changes. And don't get me wrong, like Rosa Parks, of course, and like Harriet Tubman, those are huge names.
Yeah.
But it's the people that names aren't getting mentioned that are making huge changes.
Yeah. And that we're actually understanding that they were a catalyst and they were making bigger strides in this movement, and we're unaware of it. I had no context because I wasn't given a text when I was younger to read about how many more people were involved in it, and it was such a strange, humbling place to be, and that's where the nerves came in, because you want to show up, number one, for your friend, and then number two, in this besensitive climate. So yeah, going out the gate, that was like, whew.
That's one of the better that's one of the better podcasts I've listened to, you know, especially starting out as your first guest and as like an opening scene. So I'm excited to see what people, you know, because some people are not going to like it.
Yeah.
But you can't please everyone.
No.
And if you can't accept the knowledge of, you know, someone who has a doctorate and who's lived that life, then you just got to open your brain up more.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to accept it, but you should understand it.
Yeah. And there needs to be a dialogue, and just, like I said, even just to I was talking to her about having, like, you know, when you see a fawn and they're getting like their footing, I feel like I've got fawn legs, like in any anti-racist work and doing the work within my own self. But you can't hide behind your, I don't know. Ignorance is a huge word, but I guess it's this sense of trial and error, and really understanding that there's so much to learn, and to be observed by someone that you respect and realize like you're stumbling over your words, or you're trying to form a thought, or you're just flat out wrong. It's a humbling feeling. And I think that that's where, with this podcast, I realized that I wanted this to be a learning experience for me, And whoever I'm sitting across, I'm always, number one, wanting to learn from, their experience. And number two, receiving feedback of how I can grow myself.
Right.
Because that was scary for me. I wanted to know I had it all figured out. And at 43, I know I don't have shit figured out. So if I look at, from your standpoint, it must, behind the camera, sitting and observing it. I guess my question to you is, where do you think after, this first podcast, where do you see us going?
With guests?
Yeah, guests, and where do you think we're going to go with directionally, and where would you like to see us go?
Well, from the initial idea of this podcast of people in the arts, people kind of just getting people who are unique in their own way, I still think that's important that we get on here, because at lunch, when we were just having lunch with a couple of friends that just met Seraphine today, they were really impressed with just how open you can make people and tell their story. I'm sure they wouldn't just go tell anybody that the stories that we were just talking about at lunch.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm just really impressed by your presence as a host of a podcast or as a person, So I feel like anybody we bring on, we can get into their deep thoughts, issues, doesn't have to be bad issues, but just things that go on in their daily life that is relatable to people who listen to the podcast, because I think that's important. I think you are one of the most relatable people, or you can make people feel relatable.
Yeah.
When we were having conversation with Morgan, and she just could open up to you because you were like, yeah, I've been through this. Yeah, I've done this. It just feels like you've lived a lot of life in your years.
Yeah.
To where people are oh, I'm not the only person that's going through this. And our lunch with Ariel.
Yeah.
We first time meeting this girl. Very first time, had no interaction before that,
Nothing. I mean,
nothing.
it was literally online, hey, hi, how are you? Let's meet up.
And I could have swore that, first of all, we were just having a conversation for her to possibly be on this podcast and talk about traumatic issues in her life. We were able to Seraphine was able to make her feel comfortable enough to where she told her whole story. And I've known that about Seraphine for a year now, because she knows everything about my life.
I get you talking.
She knows everything about me. So, I'm excited to see, no matter who is on the podcast, I know it's going to be interesting, because you as a host will get the most out of anybody, and people will begin to feel related to the people that you have on here, and you let people know that they're not alone.
Yeah. I think listening skills, my husband will tell you I'm still a bad listener. But I've learned to hone in my listening skills and to really, I think what it is, I like to put myself in other people's shoes, and I'm an empath. So if you're feeling something, I'm usually going through the emotions with you. And when it comes to conversation, I guess for so long, I've been the kind of person that wanted to show a prettier version of myself all the time. So there was this edge of perfection, and the layers got really peeled back over the just last 2-3 years. And my husband has a lot to do with it, but it also has to do with kind of getting comfortable in your own skin, and I don't know, just having a curiosity of wow, this is my one life that I get to live. So I want to do it well, and I want to ask questions, and I want to learn more, and just
that being said, also though, because it seemed like for the YPG podcast, it was more informational, where you would ask the question. And I remember from the very first time that we did it, you were like, yeah, I'm a really big talker. I'm just going to focus on asking the questions and let them take the show, which completely understandable. With the difference between this one's, you know, about the guest, but more about, this is Seraphine's podcast.
Yeah.
And more about you.
Yeah.
And your interaction with these people and getting to tell each other's stories to each other and like bouncing off of that. One thing I did notice from going from YPG to this podcast, it was still interview-like.
Yeah.
Versus like our conversation, this is completely candid.
Totally.
And it's a conversation. There's no like standardized questions that, you know, and those are nice.
Yeah.
But I want to see from you is more this, what we're having.
Yeah.
Because people are going to be in tune to back and forth conversation versus ask a question for 10 seconds and then a response for a minute and a half, and you just keep repeating that.
Yeah.
Just going back and forth, I think, is going to be a huge, not learning curve, but just like what we need to focus on more with our next guest and the next guest on that. But it's like saying, like, I mean, practice makes perfect.
Totally.
You know? This is,
yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, totally. And unlearning. I think the other thing is I have and I think a lot of women will relate to this, and not that men aren't kind of like
Right.
You're not told to calm it down, but for the longest time, you know, I remember that as a kid, I just wanted to be like, I'm here, I've got stuff to say, and you know, I would always get that little tap on my shoulder of like, quit showing off, you know, like you're talking too much. You're acting really weird. Like, are you trying to get attention? And I think that's that little voice, that insecurity in the back of my head, especially when I'm interacting with somebody that I can learn from. It's funny how we doubt ourselves and what we can contribute. And the other thing is just,
especially if you were feeling that way with like kind of intimidated with Dr. Auburn, you're like, you know, I have these set of questions, you know, I can easily run the script and that makes it my life easy. But it's the fact of like learning. Yeah. You're like, man, I really want to ask this question, but is it a dumb question, or is my like response to her not valuable enough, you know, to match her? Yeah. So I can feel like, I don't know if that's what you felt. That was kind of like what you felt.
There's a vulnerability.
Yeah, you definitely feel like, man, is what I'm bringing to the table valuable enough to really interest, even though you're friends, it's just like you read her scripts and everything. You're like, this girl is knowledgeable. This girl, you know, belongs to get a Nobel Prize or something. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. I mean, in comparison to a lot of people I have surrounded myself, and God love you all, you know, she really is elevated human being, and there's a lot of times we have friendships where you kind of coexist and, you know, it's easy, but it's cool when you have friends who challenge you and let you know, like, you don't know everything. And, you know, there is a big learning curve in this life. And I think that what's going to be so great and exciting about this podcast is I want to be fearless about just
be open.
Yeah.
Give people a platform where they can, excuse me, where they don't have to worry about judgment. And we were talking about that too with like Ashton and Morgan. They're like, we can talk to her without judgment. And that's 100% true. And I think that's I think that's why a lot of podcasts, you know, like with Joe Rogan and all them, they're able to just go on there and do whatever they want. And it just makes them feel so comfortable. Yeah. And you're able to speak on a platform with a host that's not going to judge you, that's going to support you, that's going to ask you questions that aren't normally asked, where it's just like, oh, these same questions again. Yeah. Because like with Dr. Auburn, you've read through all of her scripts with, you know, the possible link letter. Like, you've done your research and you're going to ask questions that aren't like you went through interviews that were already previously stated to make sure that you're not asking repeated questions, you know? And I think that's something that's special, because someone like Hot Ones,
Yeah.
the host of Hot Ones. I don't know his name exactly, but people are so surprised when he asks questions that are just, they're like, how do you know this about me? How did you even get this information? Like, it just throws them for a loop, but a good loop. It's just like, it keeps people interested in like, oh, this guy really knows his shit.
Yeah. I think it's a form of respect too, that, you know, this day and age, we're such bullshitters. You know, I mean, with social media has turned us all into people who have kind of like, I don't know, you know, like when you got, I don't know if you guys will know, like Cliff Notes, back in the day, where you don't really read the book, right? You're assigned Moby Dick, and then you get the Cliff Notes on Moby Dick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that
I don't think I read a book in high school or college. Like, actually read a book from front to back.
Isn't that?
And it's awful.
Yeah.
I should be way more educated.
Yeah.
And should have read way more books than what I was given for, like, just for educational purposes and knowledge based. But I don't think I've read a book front to back for a long. It's been a minute.
Isn't it? It's
so bad too.
It's so humbling too when you actually.
Because it's an accomplishment.
It
when
is.
When you read a book front to back, one, you feel accomplished. Two, you gain a lot of knowledge, and three, you can implement that knowledge into your daily life for the better.
Totally. And I think the thing that's so interesting is with Dr. Auburn's work, I had to read it twice because some of the shit was over my head. And I was like, I was going back to words that I had read before. I kind of knew what they were. But then right before the podcast, I'm like, how do you pronounce this? And in reference to, you know, your critical race theory.
What was the word?
Pedagogy. Pedagogy. And I was like, pedagogy, you know, and I pride myself on being a smart person, but I realize that, you know, going into this, like, for instance, I'm making a plea to Richard Linklater. He's one of my most beloved directors. And I just did this deep dive over COVID and like looked at every single interview he did. And I revisited some of his films that I had watched. And then I watched a couple that I'd kind of like avoided. And I just kept writing notes and notes and notes and notes. And there was just this, I don't even know how to describe it to you, but it was like the first time in a long time where I was just fiending for Seraphine, right? Fiending for more information. And then there's this thought in my head of like, screw it. I'm just going to ask my dream interview to be on my podcast. I'll go out to Austin and I'm going to sit down with him. And, you know, you just realize like the only way you have a shot at anything is just to try and to do it well. And I think going forward, like with this podcast, I'm going to eat up every bit of information and I'm going to put myself out there.
Yeah. As you should.
Yeah.
Because as much as this is a platform for people to be open and feel good about just talking about any issue or any experience that's happened in life, you should feel that same way.
Definitely. Well, I'm so glad you're going to be my partner in crime in it, because there's not anyone else that I would feel, I don't know,
comfortable. Really.
Yeah. And having somebody just be like your backbone of like, you can do this, you know, because it's nice to have a wing person.
Exactly.
You know,
this is a good bonus episode.
Yeah. It's our first one. I love it. Well, thanks for joining us. And you'll see us on the flip side of each podcast. Me and Aaron just sitting down and just talking. So I hope you enjoyed it.
See ya.